This is syndicated news. We have a last minute broadcast for you. This is a last minute headline. We're talking to Ernesto Arce, news producer at KPFK in Los Angeles, and he is also the Southern California bureau chief for the Pacifica Evening News. Ernesto, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
We have some problems in California. I wanted to ask you, what happened with the Occupy LA protester? What happened?
Well, this morning, about 1,400 Los Angeles Police Department officers descended on Los Angeles City Hall, where there have been approximately 400 to 600 protesters camping since October the 1st. LAPD Chief Charlie Beck and Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa got together and said enough is enough. It was their 58th day in the encampment in front of City Hall, and they said that for reasons of health and safety, they could no longer be on the south lawn of City Hall. And so there was a forcible eviction at about 12:15 Wednesday morning, and police officers came out from every direction imaginable. They came from the back door of City Hall, they came from the side doors. The Los Angeles Police Department headquarters is right across the street from City Hall. Several hundred officers came from there. They surrounded the Occupy LA protesters. They began to swiftly make arrests. They arrested 292 people, most of which are being charged with a misdemeanor, a refusal to disperse. A handful are being charged with assault on a peace officer. And essentially the Occupy LA movement was started, as I mentioned, on October 1st in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street, and with a lot of the same demands: stop corporate greed, stop foreclosures, stop cuts to the healthcare system and the education system. People wanting a little bit more for the 99%, saying that wealth and power and influence is concentrated in the hands of too few. And that was essentially what the demands of the Occupy LA movement was, which was reflected in movements across the country. And of course, it wasn't the crackdown wasn't as violent as those that we saw in Oakland and in Davis, California, and in Manhattan, but it definitely was a very tense situation. Several dozen people were injured, most of them with minor injuries, but several people were screaming in pain, a couple of protesters, and so it was a very tense situation in downtown Los Angeles this morning.
Now, Ernesto, somebody gave you his word. Who was that, and how did he break it?
Last week, I spoke with Los Angeles Police Department Chief Charlie Beck, who I interviewed, and he gave me his word that that there wasn't going to be any surprise eviction like the one that occurred in Oakland or the one that occurred in New York City. The protesters would have lots of time. I think he actually, in another press conference, gave a timetable of 72 hours notice for protesters to leave the City Hall Park. And I guess you can argue that, as of Monday morning at midnight, the park was officially closed, but there was no warning of the pending police action or the pending police eviction. And so he gave his word that there would be no surprises, that the eviction of the protesters and the arrests of those that were going to take part in civil disobedience would be done in a quote-unquote humane manner. And at about 12:15 early this morning, the police, as I had described earlier, they ran in from all directions. Several people reported that they literally ran over protesters who were sitting down on the pavement in front of the south steps of City Hall. They were locked arm in arm, and they were literally run over by LAPD officers who essentially stormed the City Hall lawn and created a perimeter around the area. And so many people were injured as the LAPD stomped on them, and a lot of people were also complaining about the manner in which they were essentially manhandled by LAPD officers. And another of the promises, or pledges rather, that LAPD Chief Charlie Beck made was that was the surprise factor, that everyone would know when the police would move in. It would be done by procedure, where officers come in, let the people know that they are in violation of a refusal to disperse, and they would be arrested. But the LAPD came in a very shocking way that one National Lawyers Guild legal observer described that they came in a way that created much more chaos than had they entered some other way. And so those are the two ways that I think LAPD officials and Los Angeles City officials kind of, reneged on their promise.
And I have another question. The media access. Who's deciding who can go in to cover this and who cannot? I understand press is being restricted now.
Well, this is probably the biggest issue, and the issue that a lot of journalists should take issue with, and that's that the LAPD decided Tuesday morning, to restrict all van and media vehicle access to City Hall. They wanted no media vehicles in the immediate vicinity of City Hall, which is an unprecedented action to take. The restriction on media access to City Hall went several steps further when they declared there was going to be a lottery for a pool media, a so-called pool media, in which only members of the media, or representatives of media outlets, arrived at 7:15 p.m. last night. They were given about a 1-hour notice. I think I received the City News Service press release at about 6 o'clock in the evening. So we were given essentially 1 hour, 15-minute notice to leave wherever it is we were and arrive at the Los Angeles Police Department Comstat room and take part in this lottery. Obviously, I didn't have time to get there. Many outlets didn't have time to get there or send a representative. And it was the media pool, or the pool media, was given to, I think, maybe about 8 or 9 reporters. The rest of us were asked to leave the City Hall area. And so that presented several First Amendment issues and freedom of the press violations. And the ACLU is looking into it currently. The LA Times wrote an article about it, as well as LA Weekly. All the major Los Angeles newspapers commented on this unprecedented restriction on the media. There was also a call that all those members of the media that took part in this media pool would have to submit their recordings and their devices to a media representative that the LAPD would choose, which is I think beyond unprecedented, and it's quite frankly something that the LAPD has never done before, and is not typical of a democracy, is not typical of the access that should be granted to the media, who are representatives of the public. And so those are some of the problems that occurred. They weren't as severe as when the time occurred for the eviction to take place. We were actually allowed to stay in the LAPD headquarter area, but we were not allowed to be anywhere near where the protesters were being arrested. And as I mentioned, there were some protesters that were screaming, that were it sounded like they were in agony, and there was no media presence to record that incident or what was occurring in the park.
The fact that they have asked for news media to submit their news articles and recordings has been the greatest news I've heard in months about Occupy Wall Street. It's the first time I've heard that in the United States. I've heard of that in third world countries. I've heard of that in Kosovo, in Latvia. I've heard of that in Russia. I've heard of that in Berlin. I heard of that in history in different countries asking for the news media to submit their articles before publication during World War II, but not in modern day United States, progressive California.
The argument from the Los Angeles Police Department in defense of their media restriction, or rather they wouldn't call it media restriction, but they would call it the pool media, was that they wanted to avoid an occurrence like that which happened in May of 2007 during a May Day protest for immigrant rights, in which several journalists, myself included, were shot by rubber bullets and were involved in altercations involving an oncoming police line that was very aggressive. Many of us filed a lawsuit against the Los Angeles Police Department. during that day for what happened. And the LAPD says that these safeguards were taken to protect the well-being of journalists who were covering the event. So that is their argument. As for why they wanted to see, and let me just clarify, I'm not sure if they wanted to see actual scripts, but they wanted to see they wanted a copy of all video and all audio recording. That step, I don't understand how that would play into our safety. I do understand that there was several requests made by the LAPD to certain individuals who were part of that pool media, and essentially that was that they didn't want any embargoed information to go out. So in the event that there was a video recording or a tape recording, they wanted to ensure that no one was giving out information about what was about to occur. So as to avoid, I really don't know. This is just a guess on my part, but so as to avoid supporters of Occupy LA, of the Occupy Wall Street in Los Angeles, coming down to City Hall and making things worse, or making things more problematic for the LAPD and its pending action.
Highly dangerous to begin asking the media to turn in their recordings and their written work. That's highly dangerous. It's reminiscent of bleaker times in former history.
And there's lots written about it already. And I've been doing some research about the restrictions that were placed on us. And hopefully I'll write something. Something will pop up somewhere.
We will gladly carry it on syndicatednews.net.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Ruthie. This is Ernesto Arce with syndicatednews.net.
And I want to thank the Institute for Public Accuracy at 980 National Press Building in Washington, D.C. for having faith in us and knowing that we always get it right here at Syndicated Newsnet. Thank you, Ernesto, for joining us with this news report.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is Ernesto Arce with syndicatednews.net.